So we're at the Mishnah on DAF Hey Amud Aleph. Ad Mosai Shoel Ines Hagishama. We had seen this Mishnah yesterday. It's really a repeat, and it's a mirror image of the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah was talking about when we begin asking for rain and when we begin praising God for rain. And this Mishnah goes and talks about until when we ask Hashem for rain. Now, so when do we? In other words, when do we stop asking for rain? So
be careful what you're asking for.
That's right. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ad Sheyavor HaPesach. Rabbi Yehuda says until Pesach passes. Now, if you remember, the Gemara had concluded that you have to stick with Ula's explanation of these words until Pesach passes, and Ula had said that even though our Mishnah, our previous Mishnah, seems to say that you would only say it until Pesach. In other words, you say Tfilas Tal on the first day of Pesach. This Mishnah argues with the previous Mishnah, and it says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would say it until the end of Pesach, until Pesach passes. Rabbi Meir Omer Ad Sheyetze Nisan. And Rabbi Meir says until the full month of Nisan elapses. Shenemar, and how do you know this? Because it says in the book of Yoel, one of the minor prophets, V'yorad lachem geshem orel malkosh barishon, that it says V'yored lachem, that God brought down for you rain, moreh u'malkosh barishon. Moreh and malkosh refer to the two stages of rain, and God brought both of those for you in the Rishon, in the first month. What is the first month? In Nisan. So we therefore see that Nisan is a month of rain, and it is therefore appropriate to continue asking for rain through the month of Nisan. So the Gemara now says, Amar le Rav Nachman le Rabbi Yitzchak. Now, remember those two names, Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak, because Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak begin this discussion, and they continue this discussion all the way until the end of the DAF, into the next DAF, because they are very good friends and they love discussing Torah with each other. So he says, Yoreh b'Nisan, Yoreh b'Mar Cheshvan. He says, so first of all, Rav Nachman asks him, he says, since when is Yoreh, which is the first rain, or the beginning rain, when does that happen in Nisan, which is all the way in the beginning of the spring? Yoreh is supposed to happen in Mar Cheshvan, which is the earlier stage of the rainy season. Detanya, Yoreh b'Mar Cheshvan u'Malkosh b'Nisan. Yoreh u'Malkosh, which we say in Kriya Shema, Yoreh is the earlier rainy season, and Malkosh is the later rainy season. So Yoreh is in Cheshvan, and Malkosh is in Nisan. How can you tell me that? How can Yoel, the prophet, tell me that both of them happened in Nisan? So Amar Lei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Bimei Yoel ben Pesuel Niskayim Mikrazeh. So he says this was a unique situation that only occurred in the lifetime of Yoel, the prophet, and Dichsiv Bey, because it says that there was a terrible, terrible drought and a terrible, terrible famine in the times of Yoel. It says, Yeser hagazam achal ha'arbeh, that was ever left of the stubble of the field was eaten by the locusts, and V'yeser ha'arbeh achal ha'yelek, and then that was eaten by another kind of grasshopper, and then that was eaten by another type of vermin. Right, so everything was completely decimated, and there was no grain left. That year, the month of Adar had gone, and it hadn't rained a single drop. Okay, Finally, the very first rain falls on the first day of Nisan. So you could say, Shkoyach, that's not going to help us. It's already too late. But no. Amar lahem Navi li Yisrael. So the Navi says to the people, Tzu'u v'zaru, go and plant. In other words, show your bitachon in Hashem. Hashem will provide. So Amar lo, Mishi yesh lo kav chitan o kabayim so'orim yochlenu v'yichya o yizrenu v'yamus. They said to him, what are you talking about? If a person were to be so fortunate to have a measure of wheat kernels or 2 measures of barley kernels, would it be better for him just to eat it to prevent himself from dying a few days, or should he plant it and die right away? So Amar lahem afal pichein tzu'u v'zaru. So he says, no, I want you to go and plant. Have bitachon. Hashem has told me that all will be well. Nasa lahem neis v'niska lahem masha b'kesal v'masha b'chorei nemolim. So a miracle happened, that they miraculously, because they were prepared to plant, they were able to discover additional grain hidden in the walls of their homes and in ant holes, because ants will sometimes hoard little kernels of grain to feed the entire ant colony. So they went in Taka, they found enough to supply them. And Yatsu v'zaru sheni u'shlishi u'revi. So they went, and on the second and third and fourth day of Nisan, that's when they spent the time planting. V'yard delahem revia shenia b'chamisha b'Nisan. And then the second rain fell on the 5th of Nisan, perfectly timed. Hikrivu omer b'shisha asar b'Nisan. And miraculously, it grew so quickly, the grain, that they were able to bring the Korban HaOmer on the 16th of Nisan. So remember, they only finished planting on the 5th of Nisan. By the 16th of Nisan, 11 days later, they were able to have a yield. So Nimtzeis Tzavua HaGedela B'Shisha Chadashim Gedela B'Achad Asar Yom. Nimtza Omer HaKarv Mitzvah Shel Shisha Chadashim Karv Mitzvah Shel Achad Asar Yom. So it turns out that normally grain that takes 6 months to grow only took 11 days, and the Korban HaOmer that is normally harvested from barley that grows in 6 months grew in 11 days, and they were able to offer the Korban HaOmer that way. Ve'al Oso Hador Hu Omer, and about that generation it says, Hazorim bedima berino yiktsaru holochelechu vacho nose meshach hazara bayavo verina nose alumosav. So we all know that. We say it so much that we forget what it means. It means that those who plant with tears will harvest with joy. They will go and walk with crying. Nose meshach hazara, they will bear the burden of the planting. But boyavo verina, they will come in with rapture or with happiness. Nose alumosav, bearing their sheaves. Now, there's a certain repetitiousness in the verses that the Gemara is going to pick up on. I understand the first part of the pasuk is talking about the Jews who planted and then miraculously were able to harvest just a few days later. But what is the second part? What do you need that for? So, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Shor kishu choresh holechu boche, uvachazirasa ochel chaziz min atelem. He says that sometimes Hashem brings a miracle that the ox who was schlepping the plow with great grunting and pain, when Hashem brings a miracle, He can cause the crops to grow so rapidly that on the ox's way back from, coming back from where he went out to plow, already there will be the initial growth growing from the ground, and he'll be able to nibble from that. That's what the pasuk is referring to. V'zehu yavo zbo yavo verina. That's what the pasuk means when it says that he, referring to the ox, will be able to come back with joy, because even just after a few hours of plowing and planting, he'll already be able to nibble on the yield. And my nose alumosav, and what's the last part of the pasuk which says coming and carrying the sheaves? Amar Rav Chisda Avrimel b'Masnisa Tana Kane Zeres Shiboles Zerasayim. That there was another additional miracle that happened in the times of Yoel. That not all, you see, normally when a stalk of wheat grows, normally only a minority of that stalk is the actual ear of the grain. The bushy part of the grain. What do they call? That's the ear, right?
Right.
So it's usually only like a quarter or a third at the most of the entire stalk. But the miracle was that these stalks, not only did they grow so rapidly, but also they were lush. That 2/3 of the entire stalk was an ear of grain. So it was like really, really heavy laden grain. Amalei Rav Nachman le Rabbi Yitzchak. So now that they're talking to each other about psukim having to do with drought and famine, let me ask you another case where there was a great famine in the times of Elisha the Navi. It says, Kikara Hashem l'ra'av v'gambo el haaretz sheva shanim. That Elisha said to the Shunammite, I think it was the Shunammite woman, he says to her that there's going to be a great famine, and it's going to come to the land for 7 years. So Bahanach sheva shanim mai achol. So the question is, during those 7 years, what did the Jews eat during that period of famine in Sefer Melachim? So Amar lehachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shana Rishana Achlu Masha Bebatim. The first year that he quotes Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yitzchak quotes Rabbi Yochanan, he says the first year they ate whatever they had left in their homes in storage. Shnia Achlu Masha Besados. The second year they had to go out to the fields and pick wild berries and stuff like that out of the fields. Shlishis basar behemotor. The third year there was no produce left out in the field, so they had to eat the livestock. They ate the kosher livestock. Revius basar behemotamei. The fourth year there was no kosher livestock, so they had to eat the non-kosher animals, the horses, the pigs, etc. Chamishis basar shkatzim urumashim. The fifth year they had to eat insects and all types of vermin. And shishis basar b'nei muvnoseim. Sixth year, tragically, they had to eat the flesh of their children. Which means, the Rashi says they took one of their children and used it to feed the whole family. And Shavias...
How long does that last? It can't last a whole year.
don't know. Depends how you store it, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to get too graphic. Yeah, right. Shavias basar zera osehem. The 7th year they ate the flesh of their own arms. L'kayim mashenemar, as to fulfill the curse of the prophet, which says in Yeshaya, ish basar zero yochelu, that each person will eat the flesh of his arms. The famine was so horrible. V'amar le Rav Nachman le Rabbi Yitzchak, mai dichsiv. Let me ask you about another pasuk, because they're discussing all these different psukim al derech agadata. He says there's a pasuk in Hosea that says, "B'kir b'cha kadosh v'lo avo ba'ir," that in your midst, says Hashem, there's holiness, but I will not come into the city. So he says, I don't understand. Mishum de b'kir b'cha kadosh lo avo ba'ir. He says, if in your midst is holiness, so then why shouldn't Hashem come inside the city? So Amar Lei Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lo Avo V'Yerushalayim Shel Mala Ad She'avo L'Yerushalayim Shel Mata. These are words of consolation to the Jewish people, that Hashem is telling them that I will not come into the heavenly Jerusalem until I bring you back and I come back to the earthly Jerusalem. In other words, Hashem is consoling Klal Yisrael. I know that you're in Golus, or that you're going into Golus. I want you to realize that I'm going to be exiled as well from the upper Jerusalem. I will be with you in Golus. And I will not return to the upper Jerusalem until you return to the lower Jerusalem. Which means that in the heavenly dimensions, there's also a kind of Jerusalem that exists. So the Gemara says, Umiika Yerushalayim Lamala. Is there such a thing as a Yerushalayim Shalmala? Yes, the Chsiv, Yerushalayim Habenuya, Ki'ir Shechubra La Yachdav. That Jerusalem, the built-up city, is like a city which is Chubra. Now the word Chubra means fortified altogether, but it also could be read as Chaver, that it has a twin. That it has a twin city. And what is the twin city of Yerushalayim Shalmata? Yerushalayim Shalmala. Okay, V'amalei Rav Nachman Rabbi Yitzchak, Mai Dichsiv. What is the meaning of the following pasuk? This is a pasuk in Yirmiyah, and also it's describing the lowly state of the Jewish people during the times of the Navi. It says, Uva'achas yiv'aru v'yichsalu, musar havolim eitzu, that with one they will be burned and they will become foolish. It is a rebuke of folly. They are a tree. Now, the simple pshat is that, like Yirmiyah is basically saying, trying to talk to you people is trying to talk to a piece of wood. You're not listening. I'm wasting my breath on trying to rebuke you. However, the Gemara says no. It says, Amar le hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan explains, there is one thing, that's what the word achas in the pasuk means. There is one thing that destroys Rishaim in Gehenna. Maihi avodah zara. And what is it? Idolatry. Kesiv hacha musar havolim eitzu, uchesiv hasam hevel hema maasei ta'atuim. Because it says over here that it is the musar havalim eitzu. It is the rebuke of folly because of it being wood. And the word hevel or havolim is our cue to connect it to the word hevel, referring to idolatry in the other pasuk in Yirmiyah, which says that the idolatry is hevel, it is folly, it is the act of foolishness. So therefore you see that what Yirmiyah was basically telling the people is that the reason why my rebuke won't work is because you're worshiping gods of wood, which will cause you no good. In other words, that will be your downfall. So va'amalei Rav Nachman Rabbi Yitzchak, mahu dichsiv ki shtayim ra'os asa ami. So the next question is having to do with the rebuke of Yirmiyah. The Yirmiyah castigates the people by telling them, you did two evil things. So the Gemara first interrupts and says, wait a minute, what do you mean they only did two evil things? Tartein da'avu, esrin v'tarte shvikalahu. Why only two? Why not a full 24? In other words, what happened to the other 22? The Rashi says that the Sefer Yecheskel details all 24 sins that the Jewish people engaged in at the time of the Churban Habayis. That's one explanation of what this number 24. Alternatively, the number 24 refers to the 24 books of Tanakh that the Jewish people completely violated. So in any event, Amar lei hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan echasi shehi shekula kishtayim. So what the Navi is referring to is one particular sin which is weighted like two, or which is a reference to two. Now we're going to see that this reference to two there are two explanations in the Gemara. But this sin is umay nihu avodah zara. And what is that sin? It's avodah zara. Dichsiv kishtayim ra'os asa ami. Osi azavu mekor mayim chayim lachatzos lahem baros nishbarim. So the first simple explanation is that it says that my people did two evils. They forsook the source of living water, of fresh, delicious, clean water, and what did they exchange it for? They exchanged it for broken wells with dirty water. So that's a double offense. It's one thing to say I'm leaving the wellspring of life, but it's another thing to say that I'm forsaking it so I can go to a well that's filled with dirty, broken water, a broken well filled with dirty water. So that's like a double offense. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's ridiculous. You leave me to go to Avodah Zarah that's worthless. That's like a double offense, a double slap in the face. And then the Gemara says, but there's another reference to two. What is the reference to two here? Because Uchsiv Behu, because it says, and here's the pasuk in Yirmiyah again, Ki avru iye kitiyim v'ra'u v'kedar shalchu v'hizbonenu ma'od. He says, God says through the Navi, I want you to pass by the islands of the Kitiyim and take a look at what they do. And go send a message to the people of Kedar and think about what they do. Hahemer goy Elohim v'hemalo Elohim ve'ami hemir kivado below yo'il. And do they exchange their God for a God that doesn't help them? My people exchange a God for a God that doesn't help them. So what does that mean? It means that what the Navi is saying is that think about these two nations, and then think about how you worship Avodah Zarah. That's the reference, the other reference to two in that pasuk. So Tana Kutiyim ovdim la'esh, v'kedariyim ovdim l'mayim. V'yafal pishiyodim shahamayim mechaben esa'esh lo himiru Eloheihem. Va'ami heimir kibodi below yo'il. So he says, in other words, the offense is that look at the loyalty of the Kitiyim and the Kedarim. They know that their gods are ineffective because the Kitiyim used to worship fire and the Kedarim used to worship water. And each nation knew that their God was limited because fire extinguishes water and water extinguishes fire. So they know that their gods are limited, and yet they remain loyal. It's like lahavdil, people root for the Leafs. You know that the Leafs are not going to win, but you're loyal to your team. So Hashem was basically telling them the same thing. He says, at least the other nations are loyal to their gods, right? But you, Bnei Yisrael, not only have you forsaken the true God, but you don't show loyalty. You don't show loyalty to the home team. So that's really what the Musar is all about. Va'amalei Rav Nachman Rabbi Yitzchak Mahu Dirsiv Vayihi Kasher Zakein Shemuel, or Kasher Zakein Shmuel. That another question that I have for you, he asks Rabbi Yitzchak. It says that when Shmuel became elderly, this is towards the end of Shmuel's life. So the Gemara's first question is, Umisiv Shmuel Kulehai. Since when did Shmuel become so elderly? V'ha bar nun beis hava. Shmuel was only 52 years old when he passed away. The Amar Mar Meis benun beishana zehu misaso shel Shmuel haramasi. That we have a teaching in a brisa that if a person dies at the age of 52, normally the Gemara says that if a person, God forbid, passes away between the age of 50 and 60, then that's a sign that he's a bar kares, that he may have been punished for a sin for which he was liable. The punishment of kares, part of the punishment of kares can be a kitzer shanim, it could be a shortening of one's lifespan. But that's only if you don't die at 52, because 52 has a special quality that Shmuel Haramasi, the prophet Shmuel, died at 52. So that's a sign that 52 is not a bar kares in that decade of 50 to 60. Now, how do we know that Shmuel was 52 when he died? So Rashi says there's a whole page of Yerushalmi that goes through the calculation to prove this. But the point is, the question the Gemara stands, how can you tell me that Shmuel became elderly if he was only 52 when he died? So Amar Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zikna Kafza Olav, that what Hashem did was a miracle. He caused Shmuel to age prematurely so that when people would see him, they would think that he was an old man. Because Hashem didn't want people to think that Shmuel was dying in the middle of his life, and therefore think that he was dying because he was a bad person. So the question is, why did Shmuel have to die so young? Now the Gemara is going to explain. Hashem says, I have remorse that I made Shaul the king. I have to replace him. Even though Shmuel, you've anointed him, you selected him. But you know what? He's got to go. So Amar Lefanav Ribono Shel Olam Shikaltani Kemoshe ve'Aaron. So when Shmuel hears this, he says, Hashem, it's not right. He says, you've equated me in the pasuk to Moshe and Aaron. Dichsiv Moshe ve'Aaron b'chohanav, u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. That the pasuk says that Moshe and Aaron in their priesthood priestlyhood, and Shmuel among those who call out his name. So therefore, Ma Moshe ve'Aaron lo batlu ma'aseh yadeim b'chayeim, afani lo yisbatel ma'aseh yodai b'chayai. So just like Moshe and Aaron were the teachers of Yehoshua ben Nun, and Yehoshua ben Nun was able to continue through their lifetime, and they never saw the demise of their disciple in their lifetime, so too I should not see the demise of my handiwork in my lifetime. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Heichi Yavid. So Ribbono Shel Olam realizes that Shmuel has a good taina. So he says, what should I do? Lemo Shaul lo kashavik Shmuel. If I were to cause Shaul to die, then Shmuel's going to have tainas. He's not going to let me. Lemo Shmuel adazoter meranani abasre. If I cause Shmuel to die now so that he doesn't have to see the demise of Shaul, so then people are going to claim that he was a rasha because he died so young. So lo lemo Shaul v'lo lemo Shmuel kvar higia malchus David vein malchus nogas b'chaberet afilu kim lo nima. To let Shaul and Shmuel stay alive, that I also cannot do, because it's already come time for King David to become the king, and we know a general rule that one monarchy cannot impinge on its succeeding monarchy even a hair's breadth. So therefore I have to cause Shaul to die before David can become king, and it's now time for David to become king. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu akfitz alav zikna. So therefore Hashem says, what I will do is I will cause Shmuel to age prematurely, so that when people see him they'll think he's a very old man. And Hainu dichsiv v'shol yoshev begiva tachas ha'eshel birama. And that's why the pasuk says that Shaul was sitting in Giv'ah. Now Giv'ah is in the portion of Binyamin where Shaul was from. But it also says that he was sitting under a tree in Ramah. Now Ramah we know is in the portion of Ephraim. So the Gemara's question is, V'chima in Giv'ah etzel Ramah. Why are you telling me that he was in two geographic locations? He was either in Binyamin or Ephraim. Which one is it? So Elolomar lecha mi garam l'shol sheyeshiv begivah shteishan mumechza tfilaso shel Shmuel aramasi. The answer is, what caused Shaul to dwell in Giv'ah an extra 2.5 years before he died? It was the prayer of Shmuel, who said, I don't want to see the demise of my disciple, of the person whom I anointed. And basically that's what Hashem did, is that he said that, yes, I'm going to cause Shmuel to age. People will have to see it happen as a gradual, over the course of a couple of years. And then by that time they'll think that Shmuel is a very old man, and then I'll be able to take his life, and then I'll be able to take Shaul's life. But that's the reason why Shaul lived an extra 2.5 years, to be able to go through that process. So now the Gemara says, since when can Hashem cause one person to die because of somebody else? Which is, the Gemara is asking a very important theological question. Normally people die because of their own crimes or because of their own destiny. But now the Gemara is suggesting that sometimes Hashem will cause A to die for the sake of B. So the Gemara says, yes, that can happen. Amar of Shmuel bar Nachmeni, Amar of Yonasan, Mahu dichsiv al kein chatzafti banavim haragtim beimrefi. Because that's what the pasuk means, and this is a pasuk in Hosea as well. It says that God says, I have created a cleavage, like a cutting amongst the prophets. I have killed them with the words of my mouth. B'maseim lo ne'amar ela beimrefi. Alma mitchi gavra mikibri gavra. So you see that sometimes a great tzaddik, like a prophet, will not die because of their deeds, but rather will die because of divine decree. So you see that sometimes a person can die through no fault of his own, but because of a greater destiny that has to do with even another person. This is a very important theological principle. When sometimes young people die, Ribbono Rachmana litzlan, and they're righteous people. So you have to realize is that not every person is judged individually. That sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges the world in the context of a much larger scheme of affairs. And therefore it's possible for one person to die in order to fulfill a larger destiny for an entire community, or even for another individual who has another destiny. And that person's life was of great value for the time that they were here on the earth, but it doesn't mean that their demise was because of their sins. It means their demise was to realize something else that needed to happen.
Some tzaddikim died for the sins of the generation.
That's right. That's another issue. That's another theological principle. Here, that's not exactly the same, but what you're underscoring is that there are multiple reasons why people die.
The other religion that has taken this concept, it's our concept that they use.
Absolutely our concept. Most things in Christianity are ours. So they distort them, right? But most of them start with us. Rav Nachman v'Rabbi Yitzchak havu yaspi b'sudas. Now we have another story about Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak. They were sitting and dining together. Amalei Rav Nachman le Rabbi Yitzchak lema mar milsa. No, give us a vort. Now let me ask you something. When you're sitting at the Shabbos table, we know it says in Pirkei Avos, we're going to learn it this week. People are sitting at a Suda, they have to say Divrei Torah, right? So that's what he's saying, L'chorah. So Amar Lei, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ein Mesichin Besuda Shemayaktim Kana Leveshet. So Rabbi Yitzchak says back surprisingly to Rav Nachman, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to speak during the meal because maybe you can choke on your food. It'll go down the wrong way if you're speaking while you have food in your mouth. Which again is a surprising statement because after all, so swallow what you have in your mouth, put down your fork for a second, and then say it Dvar Torah. Like, is it so hard to do that?
Yeah,
so right. So what does he mean? Right? What does he mean? So v'yavo lidei sakana. So that's the problem. You may come to sakana. So basa desod. So after they finish the meal, Amar lei. So Rabbi Yitzchak then says, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Yaakov Avinu lo meis. He said that Yaakov, our patriarch, never died. And how do I know that he never died? Amar lei v'chi b'chdi saptu saptanai v'chantu chantais. Rav Nachman says, what are you talking about? You mean they eulogized him for naught and they embalmed him for naught? The kavru kivraya, and they buried him for naught. So Amar lei mikra ani doiresh. She says, Rabbi Yitzchak says, sorry, look, I'm looking at the pasuk. The pasuk says, Shenemar de'ata al tira avdi Yaakov ne'um Hashem ve'al techas Yisrael. Do not fear my servant Jacob, and do not tremble, O Israel. Ki hineni moshiecha merachok ve'azaracha me'eretz shavim. I will save you from afar, and your descendants also from the land of their captivity. So makishu lazaro mazaro b'chaim afu b'chaim. So you see that the pasuk connects Yaakov himself with his descendants, just like your descendants will be redeemed from captivity while they're alive. So to you, Yaakov, you never died. And as like Tosfos points out, the pasuk in Parshas Vayechi just says Vayikva Vayei Osef, that he expired and he was gathered. It never says the word Vayamos. Now, what this means exactly, I refer you to the Ramban in Parshas Vayechi, who has a very mystical explanation that sometimes by the extremely righteous, by Yaakov Avinu, they use their bodies as garments, and the Neshama stays within the body even after death. The Gemara also explains that at the time of the burial of Yaakov Avinu, Maras HaMachpelah, he was still animated and alive. He was smiling even at the time when, that whole story where Esav was beheaded at that time. So anyway, so you see that there's a certain animation that still exists within Yaakov Avinu. It's not just a figurative thing. It's not to be taken literally. So the question is, why did Rabbi Yitzchak choose this Devar Torah to say after they finish their meal? The Torah Tamima has an amazing vort. So first, he answers the question that I first says, like, why is it that a guy can't swallow his food and say a Devar Torah? Put down the fork for a second. Right? Right? So what's going on over here? So he explains that it's not the concern for the speaker. The speaker can swallow his food and say a Dvar Torah. It's the listener. Because if the listener is in the middle of the meal and he's eating, listening attentively while he's chewing his food, the speaker may say something that is so shocking that he's going to go, he'll gasp. And through that gasp, he'll choke on his food. So you have to be very careful, right? When you say a Dvar Torah at the meal, make sure it's not too shocking and provocative, which is what Rabbi Yitzchak wanted to show. Yaakov Avinu lo meis. What are you talking about, Yaakov Avinu lo meis? Like he took it. You can hear the gasp that Rav Nachman is making at this point. That was the reason why. Now, let's see, and you'll see he's going to say another teaching, which is also like a gasp moment.
What's that at the Bar Torah by saying that halacha though?
Right. So that gufa could be part of the taich in the Gemara. Ein meisichim b'so chasuda fulfills the mitzvah of Devar Torah at the meal. And then let me explain to you why I did not elaborate. Very good. So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak kol ha'omer rachav rachav miyad nikri. Another shocking statement is that anyone who says the name Rachav will immediately have a carry, will have a seminal emission out of just because of his being overtaken by amorous desire for this woman. So we just read about Rachav in this last week's Haftorah because she was one that gave sanctuary to the spies, to Yoshua's spies. So Amar le Rav Nachman ana amina v'lo ichbasli. So Rav Nachman says, I can say Rachav all day long and I'm not affected by it. So Amaleki Kamina Biyoda Uvemakira. So he says, you have to know her and you have to have had experience with her to know what an amazing woman she was. And then if you would mention her name, you'd have a carry. So anyway, Ki Havu Mifteri Mehadadi Amrele Livrachanmar. So as they were departing from each other, so Rav Nachman said, Rabbi Yitzchak, please give me a bracha. So Amar Le Emshalacha Mashal Lamahadar Verdoima. I think it's Rav Nachman asking Rav Yitzchak to give him a bracha, but I could be mistaken.
That's what it says here.
Yeah, okay. Rav Nachman asked Rav Yitzchak, give me a bracha. So Rabbi Yitzchak says back to him, let me give you a mashal. This is a very famous Gemara. We've all heard this at various simchas, right? La'adam shayaholech ba'midbar v'haya ra'eh v'ayef v'tzameh. That person is walking through the desert. He's hungry, he's tired, he's thirsty. Umatza ilan sheperosav mesukin v'tzilo na'eh v'amas hamayim overes tachtav. And he finds a tree that the fruit of the tree is very sweet, its shade is very pleasant, and there's a brook running underneath the tree. Achal mi perosav v'shas, mamish like an oasis. So achal mi perosav v'shas mi meima v'yoshav b'tzilo. See, he sits and he eats the fruits and he drinks the water and he sits underneath a pleasant shade. And then when it's time for him to leave and continue on his journey, Omar Ilan Ilan b'meh varcheka. Tree, how can I bless you? Im Omar lach shiyu perosecha mesukin arei perosecha mesukin. If I tell you, may your fruit be sweet, your fruit is already sweet. Shehei tzilchana arei tzilchana. To say, may your shade be pleasant, your shade is already pleasant. Shetei amas hamayim uveres tachtecha harei amas hamayim uveres tachtecha. That to say that may there be a brook running underneath you, there already is. Ela yihiratzam shekol netio shenotin mimeich you kemosech. But rather may it be the will of Hashem that all acorns that they plant from your tree should grow up to be just like you. So you too, says Rabbi Yitzchak to Rav Nachman, how can I bless you? Im b'Torah harayesh lecha Torah. If I bless you that you should be a Torah scholar, you already are a Torah scholar. Im ba'osher harayesh lecha osher. If I bless you with wealth, you already have wealth. Im b'banim harayesh lecha banim. If I bless you with children, you already have children. Kanai nahara. Elehi ratzon sheyutzei me'echa kemoscha. May it be al Hashem's will that all who descend from you should be just like you. What a beautiful sentiment. By the way, if you ever want to say this at a simcha, I can guarantee you that 90% of the people have already heard this one.